Hello, everybody. Uh, welcome to, what are we calling it? Well, it depends, I think is the official name of this. Still a work in progress. My name is Paddy,
Pavel.
and I'm going to ask you, Pavel. We always start with a question, but my question to you is, what is our question today? And I guess, where does it come from?
The question comes from us, and the question is, how do you manage dependencies? How do you handle dependencies? And let's give it a try.
Yeah, easy question, right? Shouldn't take long. Dependencies, not a tough nut to crack. No, of course I'm joking. Yeah, a lot to discuss.
Yeah, I was thinking that maybe we could start with what is the dependency?
Hmm.
And I work mostly in software development, and probably my understanding and definition of it would come from that space. Uh, in usually it appears the dependency as one team needs something from another team. Maybe it's about waiting for another team to finish something. Maybe you can't start before someone finishes. Maybe you can't finish before someone finishes. But it's this idea of waiting for something to happen. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I
yeah,
think I subscribe to that. That's a good place to start. And I think, in my experience outside of teams as well, if you're thinking a little bit bigger, at the level of, things that we're trying to do, the same the same principle can apply. Like the same way of thinking can apply. So something is needed before something else can happen, and that's a maybe a straightforward way to begin. And the work that I think of first when I think about dependencies is, Troy McGinnis is someone who I've talked to before about this, and he's talked about three kinds of, I think it's three, a taxonomy of dependencies. And he refers to a paper from the University of Wellington in his work, and I'll see if I can share the link to it. But he talks about knowledge, task, and resource as being three kind of categories of things for which we have this kind of common need. So one team needs a task to be done from another, or needs a resource from somewhere, or needs knowledge from somewhere before the next thing can happen. And um, I like that way of thinking too. How does that fit with your experience?
yes, definitely. Uh, Another place to mention when I'm thinking about dependencies, it was something that was, in my experience, the most frustrating thing that happened over and over again, because the frustration came from this idea that we're blocked, we can't do something. And also from coach perspective, it's this idea that people are waiting, and then since they are waiting, they probably start another task. And there's a saying that there's waiting hidden in doing. So it's like, since you wait, then you start doing, and then maybe you are blocked again, and you start doing again. And yeah,
Mm.
it's a lot of things that are started but not finished. My revelation, I remember many years ago, was hearing for the first time a talk from Craig Larman when he was talking about less, um, and he was talking about feature teams. And I remember it was like, oh my God, that's so simple and that's so powerful. It's you need feature teams, and feature teams. Uh, Unless they are talking about component teams and feature teams. Component teams are specializing in some small technical component of a system. It's like the team structure is mapped to architecture structure, and very often the team is named after a component that they're working on. Uh, And feature teams are teams that can work on some customer-centric requirement end to end. So they don't need anything from anyone else. And yeah, if you have feature teams, if your organization is structured around feature teams, you reduce the amount of time. You don't need to wait for another team. You don't have handoffs with another team. You have less waiting. You have easier time planning your sprints. You have less iteration issues. You know your life is better. Your family loves you more. Your food tastes better. It's like yeah,
These are
it's
great
all.
revelations. This is, yeah.
uh, and I was watching some time ago a talk from Bas Vode, who is another co-creator of Less. I've noticed they are drifting a bit more towards interdependent teams.
Mm,
So fewer teams working closely on some related piece of yeah, software, some related items,
mm,
something that is valuable to the customer. So people or teams collaborate more and pair up more, and they work closer together across teams. So teams are still separate in the sense that they have their own identity, uh, but on the other hand, from outside, it's hard to understand who works where because there's so much collaboration going on. Um, so maybe to summarize, try to link it with what you said. I'm not sure if it's me keep who whose understanding is changing, or is it less that is evolving a bit? Uh, but they tend to, yeah, they went from team of few people that can do everything as a feature team to more like you sometimes need more than one team to do stuff. So let's figure out how to have a team of teams that still has benefits of a small team.
mm.
Um, yeah, I don't know how that sounds for you.
It sounds great. I mean, I love that those guys you mentioned, like Craig Larman and Bas Vod. I definitely got a great perspective, and the materials of less. Although I'm not as familiar with using less as I would like to be, I'd love to have an experience of using it in the wild, you know. I love the ideas from it. And I think I like that. I think I buy into that idea that having a completely autonomous team is a lovely sort of North Star, a nice thing to work towards. But in practice, you know, how many teams in organizations will be completely autonomous? I think it's a vanishingly small percentage. You know, to
Yeah.
have that complete autonomy, it would be amazing. So I mean, I also one other person who I've listened to on this is a guy called Ken Rubin, wrote one of the earliest books on Scrum and does a lot of work on dependencies. And I like his way of thinking about dependencies between teams as either structural, which is the way our teams are organized. Team A is always going to need something from Team B because that's just the way they're set up, right? Team A knows this component and is kind of a feature team. Team B knows these other components and is kind of a feature team. But because of the people we have and the context we're in, they're always going to need something from each other. And that's just
Yeah.
the way they're set up. And then we have the idea of the instantiated dependency. So when we plan something, when we actually start work that creates the need for a teammate to say, hey, we need that thing from you now. And here's why. You know, we're doing this. So how to handle, how to manage dependencies is different, I think, if you're talking about a structural, as in our teams are set up a certain way, therefore we will always, and an instantiated, which is we're planning and we're doing something now, therefore we need to make sure the thing actually happens. And I think there's a distinction there that's helpful for people like maybe tech leads in teams or scrum masters in teams or product owners in teams to look at a dependency and say, how often does this happen? How important is it for us? And what's the risk if this slows down, if this gets a delay, if and you know I'm going to use the blocker word. I think you said it earlier, but right, if it becomes a blocker, oh blocker, everybody stop, we've got a blocker, right? Nothing's happening anymore. We have a blocker. What's the impact of that to the customer? And you get the prize for saying customer first today, but ultimately we're doing this for somebody, right? We're not just doing it for each other, handing off work to each other, throwing a frisbee backwards and forwards, right? So ultimately, what's the impact to the customer if this stops? And there's some nice ideas in there in Ken Rubin's work about how to approach, how to perhaps make the impact of an instantiated dependency less, and how to remove the structural dependencies over time. And perhaps
Yeah,
that's where our focus could be rather than the instantiated.
uh, that's yeah. Sometimes when I work with teams, it's like there is no option to use less large-scale Scrum idea of you should get rid of dependencies. You shouldn't manage them. You should get rid of them. It's almost like saying, the problem is capitalism, so you should just abolish it. And good luck with that. I mean,
Holacracy.
uh, it- sometimes you need to have an idea uh, what to do when you have those dependencies. Uh, the structural dependencies that you mentioned, I remember even when we worked together, we used something to, yeah, different tools to try to visualize them.
Mm,
Uh, there's a lot of pictures online of those ideas. You connect them with a string, and it
yeah.
instantly brings me to this meme of guy showing like everything is connected, and he's smoking a cigarette, and I love this. Uh, and we also tried in one of the teams something a bit smaller in terms of you just try to visualize, like write down the dependencies as they are happening. So you just write, we depend with this on this team, and you put it as a sticky note or
Mm,
on some space. Probably nowadays it would be Miro, but back then it was a sticky on a whiteboard. And you just start gathering those sticky notes, and after some time, you see some patterns emerging, and then you can do a lot of things with this information. Sometimes you can actually initiate a conversation about changing the structure of the teams. Sometimes you can't do it, or yeah, you can initiate, but it will die very, very quickly. But then you still know who you depend on, and you can have better conversations about, yeah, what to do when the dependency happens. How can you talk about it in advance? Maybe you can do some planning around it. Maybe you can try to reduce the amount of dependencies that are happening. So uh, I think, yeah, one take on it would be to start somehow gathering this information, maybe visualize it.
yeah, and I can speak to some work I did before using, I think, kind of a version of the Ken Rubin approach mixed in with some of Troy McGinnis's ideas. And it was literally just to go to every team, maybe through the Scrum Master, maybe the tech lead, maybe the product owner, depending on the team, and ask kind of the same three questions. We used a Miro board for it, and it was think about the kind of structural dependencies you need. So I use the definitions that I mentioned at the beginning. So sometimes it's knowledge, sometimes it's tasks, sometimes it's resources and things you need from another team in order to get something done. One, how often does the dependency come up? So if we have a really noisy but infrequent dependency, maybe something's happened once and everybody remembers it, right? Maybe we've learned our lessons from that, right? That maybe isn't the most important thing to focus on. But if you have a relationship that happens frequently and it has a tendency to delay often and has a high impact on customer, delivery or our quality when it does happen, that's the subset. And you can do some really cool things with a team list across all the teams in your area. I'm not going to use any loaded terms, right? Teams in your collection of teams wherever you are. Choose your language of choice.
Is it next to?
But you can actually visualize that in lots of interesting ways. And we ended up using a kind of an online free tool just to create an image of the highest impact, highest frequency, most often dependencies. And there was actually quite a low number. Like once teams rate their own relationships with other teams, they'll generally only pick two or three at the top. And that can be a team conversation, you know. So then you get to see at the level of the system, okay, where's the heat? Where's our most impactful, way of
Yeah,
handling or managing dependencies?
yeah, that resonates very well with me in terms of I've been reading about biases recently a lot, and it's also looping back to gathering data,
Mm,
because otherwise you risk of having a conversation about a dependency that really hurt someone very recently, the recency bias, and they will be very frustrated about it. But
mm,
then, is it the most important thing to try and solve? Is it the most something that keeps reappearing, or was it just a one-off and it won't happen again for the next 2 years or something like this? So yeah, it's great to have some data to work with, and you don't need to be super sophisticated about the way of gathering them.
no, no. But I think one point, I was talking with a agile coach friend recently, and he mentioned using Troy McGinnis's work in relation to the number of dependencies on getting something done, and how your chance of delay increases exponentially, like with every
Yeah,
dependency you have. So if you need five other teams to do something, your chance of getting it done on time gets very, very small
yeah,
because there's so much outside of your control.
yeah,
So there's real value, to come back to that topic we discussed recently. There's real value in working on and managing and dealing with dependencies, trying to reduce their impact, or give people heads up earlier, or maybe deal with the structural reason for the dependency and remove the dependency altogether. That would be, I mean, that would be amazing if it's possible.
yeah. I feel like the question is answered. Uh,
Okay, great. Well, let's
but
see.
tell
Let's see
me,
if we get.
what do
Let's
you
see if we
think?
get feedback. I mean, for me, it's great. I've enjoyed this conversation. It's brought back some memories of things I've tried, and I'm interested in the things that you've mentioned as well. So I'll seek those out and have a look.
Yeah, I guess it's always difficult. It's always different. Some patterns are there in terms of what what I tried, for example, what worked for me, but then it's a different conversation each time. Recommendations? We wanted to have something at the end.
Yeah. Recommendations. I'll find something from Troy McGinnis. I'll find something from Ken Rubin. I think they would be my two favorite recommendations. So Troy McGinnis is about defining dependencies and tactics for handling with them, and using kind of mathematical models to show their impact. Really valuable stuff. And Ken Rubin's work is about how your dependencies can be structural or instantiated, among other things. But that's where I got that reference for today. So that'd be my two.
Cool. I look for something from, I think it was Bas Voda giving a talk about interdependent teams and dependencies in general. So I'll just copy paste somewhere the link to this YouTube video.
Great.
Awesome.